Do you believe that there are people who have been declared dead, some even placed in the morgue, only to suddenly come back to life as if nothing had happened? Let me tell you a story. In 1906, in the state of Kansas, USA, a 20-year-old man named Havy, born into a wealthy family, tragically passed away from illness. His fiancée, however, believed that he wasn't truly dead, but merely unconscious from the severity of his sickness. She refused to have him buried and insisted on bringing the coffin home. And then, something strange happened. Havy came back to life. This bizarre event caused a stir across the US at the time. Many began to suspect that people might have been buried alive due to doctors mistakenly declaring them dead. It was a reasonable concern. After all, medical technology back then wasn't advanced enough to clearly determine whether someone had truly died or not. In response, health authorities issued new regulations. Corpses must be kept for at least 1 full week before burial. Several cities even established waiting mortuaries to store and monitor the bodies, just in case someone came back to life. And this is just one of many real-life stories about people who seemingly came back from the dead. Some, like Havy, recovered and lived on for years. Others revived only briefly before passing away again, this time for real. This strange phenomenon has been reported all over the world. So, have you ever wondered why such bizarre occurrences happen? Let's explore the mystery together in today's video. These stories may sound like scenes straight out of a horror movie, but in the real world, this is a medically recognized phenomenon known as the Lazarus Syndrome. Lazarus Syndrome, or the Lazarus phenomenon, is the spontaneous return of circulation after failed attempts at resuscitation. According to a 2007 report by researcher Vedamurthy Adiyaman and colleagues, in about 82% of documented Lazarus syndrome cases, ROSC occurred within 10 minutes after CPR was stopped. Even more surprisingly, around 45% of those patients regained proper neurological function. Since this phenomenon was first described in medical literature in 1982, there have been at least 38 documented cases. These are patients who were officially declared dead after their hearts had stopped, only to suddenly wake up and return to normal activity. One question that arises is whether the shutdown of bodily organs is caused by delayed circulation or by gaps in continuous resuscitation techniques at the hospital. So far, scientists around the world have not been able to fully explain the Lazarus phenomenon. However, they believe that this syndrome may be more common than previously reported in medical studies. One hypothesis suggests that this phenomenon may be a side effect of resuscitation drugs, such as adrenaline. Additionally, an abnormally high level of potassium in the blood has also been proposed as a possible explanation for the Lazarus phenomenon. Scientists argue that it should not be called a case of coming back from the dead, because patients with Lazarus syndrome were, in fact, never truly dead. According to the Cleveland Clinic, a typical Lazarus case generally follows 6 basic steps. 1. The patient experiences cardiac arrest. 2. Doctors perform CPR in an attempt to revive the patient. 3. After CPR is deemed unsuccessful, the doctors declare the patient dead. 4. Another physician conducts a clinical examination, confirming death by observing dilated pupils, no pulse, and no respiratory reflexes. From that moment on, no further medical intervention is carried out. 5. Minutes, or sometimes even hours later, the patient spontaneously begins to breathe and shows a returning heartbeat. 6. Doctors confirm that the patient's circulatory function has been restored and the patient is placed under intensive care. So how can we truly determine whether someone is actually dead? According to scientists, there are 2 types of death: clinical death and biological death. Clinical death is defined as the absence of heartbeat and breathing, while biological death refers to the complete and irreversible loss of brain activity. Based on these definitions, one could assess whether a person has truly died. However, in certain cases, it's not that simple. Some medical signs can help diagnose whether a patient is truly dead, such as hypothermia, neurological paralysis, and locked-in syndrome, a condition where the patient remains fully conscious but unable to respond. When the body temperature suddenly drops, it can lead to prolonged exposure and hypothermia, which may result in death. Some patients with hypothermia experience such a slow heart rate and breathing that it becomes nearly impossible to detect, leading others to mistakenly believe they are dead. Hypothermia was also the cause of a mistaken death diagnosis for a newborn baby in Canada in 2013. The baby was born on a sidewalk in freezing temperatures. Doctors were unable to detect a heartbeat or breathing, and the baby was declared dead. 2 hours later, the baby began to move. Dr. Michael Klein from the University of British Columbia in Canada explained that the baby's exposure to cold temperatures caused the circulation to halt. However, the baby's neurological function remained active and the child was still aware despite the freezing cold. In 2014, a 91-year-old woman suddenly woke up in a morgue in Poland. Janina Kolkovich had been declared dead and was placed in a cold storage unit to preserve her body. After 11 hours, a morgue worker noticed that the body bag containing Kolkovich was moving. He called her family and the rescue team, who then warmed her up with a bowl of soup, hot tea, and 2 pancakes. Many people with locked-in syndrome exhibit slow breathing, reduced sensitivity, and complete immobility, which can last anywhere from a few minutes to several weeks. This condition can arise from conditions like epilepsy and Parkinson's disease. In such cases, patients remain aware of their surroundings but are completely paralyzed, with the exception of the muscles controlling eye movement. As a result, many individuals have been mistakenly declared dead. Fortunately, according to researchers, the Lazarus Syndrome is extremely rare. Thus, we can understand that those who come back to life are cases of clinical death. The person has stopped breathing. Their heart has stopped beating. The doctors have examined them and declared them dead, placing them in a coffin. However, due to the survival instinct battling against death, they manage to revive themselves and wake up, not progressing to biological death. Therefore, to determine if a person is truly dead, it is not enough to simply observe the cessation of breathing and heartbeats. A thorough examination is necessary. Only when it is certain that the patient has reached biological death should they be declared dead, and burial should only take place 24 hours later. Not only is the phenomenon of people coming back to life widely recorded in modern times, but it has also appeared many times throughout history, especially in the 18th century. This was a period when cholera was rampant, and due to the high number of victims, doctors feared prolonged contact with the bodies could spread the disease. As a result, the examination of corpses was often done hastily. The outcome was that some people were buried alive. These individuals were later discovered to have woken up in their graves, with their hair and nails grown longer, their arms raised, and their palms facing upward. Author Christine Quigley recounts in her book, The Corpse, A History, that in the early 1900s, there was a case of a person being buried alive discovered every week. In 1905, British reformer William Tebb collected evidence of 219 cases where victims were almost buried alive, 149 cases where people had actually been buried alive, and 10 cases where doctors performed autopsies on living patients because they mistakenly believed them to be dead. Remarkably, Tebb discovered 2 cases where dead individuals woke up in the midst of the embalming process. In conclusion, there are many scientific hypotheses explaining the phenomenon of people coming back to life. However, regardless of the cause, the final explanation remains that these patients were not actually dead. Nevertheless, the Lazarus Syndrome, or the misjudgment of declaring a person dead while they are still alive, is extremely rare in real life. Researchers recommend that patients should be monitored for 10 minutes after death, as this is the time frame in which spontaneous circulation may be delayed. It is important not to immediately conclude that a patient is dead when signs of cardiac arrest, cessation of breathing, and the absence of a pulse are present. So, we now have an answer to the phenomenon of people coming back to life. If you've ever witnessed or heard of such a story, feel free to share it in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with our upcoming videos in the Decoding series.